Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Testnaut channel. It is March and it's McIntyre month in 2025. We've already done a segment this month concerning some McIntyre brothers who were sent to New England, what was then an English colony in the mid 1600s. And that was a result of a battle called the Battle of Dunbar. And later on, some more men came as a result of the Battle of Worcester. Today, John D. Demos is with me again from South Berwick, Maine, at the Old Berwick Historical Society, um, to talk about the Battle of Dunbar that resulted in these men's indenturement in New England. How are you doing, John? Thanks for being here again.
I'm doing great. It's great to see you, Ray.
Absolutely. We've been playing this for a few weeks now, actually more than that, getting everything together, and I appreciate your time. By mid 17th century,
Exactly.
1600s, yes. Um, So what is the story with the religious situation and such and over in England at the time in Scotland?
And that's what I wanted to do. Okay, first of all, I wanted to say I'm an amateur historian,
Hmm.
and I've taken a deep dive into the Scots that came, the POWs that came to Maine and New Hampshire, trying to gather as much information. I've been working on a map that I've put together of where they were in Maine and New Hampshire, which we're going to have available for sale on our website at the museum shortly
Oh, wonderful.
this month. Yeah. And um, and I really appreciate you asking me to talk about the Battle of Dunbar because this allowed me to take a much deeper dive into what's going on there and the background. So what I wanted to do, I've been doing some studying, and this is Cromwell's Convicts, which is a book that a fellow John Sadler and Rosie Certaville has written, and I'm also looking at this one by John Granger about Cromwell
Ah,
and trying to get a real close look at the battle. But one of the things the caveats I wanted to do, um, one needs to take what I'm going to say with a grain of salt, or more than a grain of salt, a salt cellar, a whole, for
right.
various reasons. Because first of all, I'm not a professional, but second of all, we're talking about a period about 375 years ago. So when the record keeping wasn't very good.
Right.
Uh, the English would uh, obviously be wanting to overestimate the size of their victory, underplay their losses, and um, and then also the Scots would be trying to play down how bad the situation was for them. So you've
Right.
got real scattering. I've gone to different sources of how many troops were available um, on either side.
Yep.
What the casualty levels were, and there are real discrepancies. I mean, it's astounding. Uh, I see some sources that show the English was 7,500 foot soldiers, 3,500 horse. The Scots was 16,000 foot and 6 to 7,000 horse.
Ah,
So that And then, but you can see some where the English 20 killed in action, 30 wounded. That's the underestimates that probably Cromwell was coming up with.
yeah.
But then the Scots, normally the figure I see for the Scots is losing about 3,000 killed in action. But some of these sources have the number from 800 to 3,000, 300 to 500 killed in action, 1,000 wounded to 3,000 wounded. So they're all over the place. So I'm going to use
Right.
some figures that um, I think are better accepted nowadays, where you've got about 15,000 English under Cromwell invade uh, and 1650.
Mhm.
And by the time of the battle, he's lost quite a few. So his numbers are down to about 11,000, and I'll explain that. The Scots, the number is around 14,000 or so soldiers. So the Scottish army, but some have them up at 22,000. So, it's really unclear who had the advantage. But
Yes.
so I wanted to throw that out first. But Then I wanted to give some background because this is a very complicated time in history. Um, Within one person's lifetime, the number of wars that were being conducted is extraordinary,
Right.
but it reminds me very much of what's occurring right now in terms of religious sectarian wars, changes of alliances, strange things happening in this whole
Right.
thing. One of the things when I've been talking about this over the years, is you can talk about the wars of the Three Kingdoms versus the English Civil War. And from what I can see, the proper way to refer to this is the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, which is, of course, England, Scotland, and Ireland,
Okay.
that covers a timeline from about 1625 when James the Fifth, James the Sixth, and also James the First, because he was James the First of England, but he was James the Sixth of Scotland. So the first Scottish king, the first Stuart king to
Hmm.
succeed the Tudors and his son. And then the War of the Three Kingdoms goes all the way up past the 1650s. So, and within that is the two English civil wars are sort of buried in that. So I just have a
Right.
basic timeline. I don't want to I hope I don't confuse people. I've tried to make this as simple as possible.
Yep.
But 1625, Charles I accedes to the throne of his father, James. Uh, and then what ensues from like 1626 to 1637 is the normal struggles with Parliament. Since Parliament's been created, I think in the 13th century is the first actual official establishment of Parliament. And it's always a struggle with the kings and the parliamentary leaders between
Yep.
who controls power.
Hmm.
So throughout a long period there, Charles, who's a big believer in the divine right of kings and doesn't like being told what to do, is struggling with the parliament that he's constantly dismissing and bringing back because he needs to get money to fight his wars and do various things. But by 1637, a real story starts here with the Charles I, who was his attempt to impose Anglican services on the Presbyterian Church of Scotland.
Oh, yes.
So that really kicks off what's going to happen in the next few decades.
So he's advising them how to worship in their churches in Scotland is what's going on, John, pretty much.
And I wanted to
Mhm.
do a little background about, okay, the different, you've got the Catholic Church, so you've got the Irish who are Catholics, and they're struggling with Henry VIII has come in and broken off with the Catholic Church and installed the Church of England,
Oh, yes.
which is the Episcopalian Church, also known as the Anglican Church over here.
Oh, good point. Thank you for that. Yes.
And so there you've got the fragmentation of the Protestant, that Luther had set up the Protestant religion, Calvin, and you see this fragmentation going on. Meanwhile, uh, the Presbyterian Church the Kirk in Scotland is in charge and the official religion there.
All right.
And the difference between Episcopalians and Presbyterians are Episcopalians threw off the Pope, but they kept the bishops and the priests.
And the saints and all.
Yeah, it's basically the closest to Catholicism is Episcopalianism, I believe.
Yes.
They've got bishops and they have priests, but they don't have a pope that that lords over them.
Okay, good. That's how I think of it as well. Yep.
The Presbyterians, on the other hand, have a system. I believe they still have the priests, but they have a ruling body that is elders and priests,
Yes.
no pope.
Hmm.
And then you have the other element of, because Cromwell was a Puritan, and the Puritans, of course, were trying to go back to a more Puritan Calvinistic style of and throwing off all the glitter and you know goo of the Catholic Church and the other two the Protestant churches, and they're simply ministers between them and God.
Okay.
So, so okay, just for that background.
Good.
In 1637, Charles, who's already suspect because he's married a French woman who's Catholic, so he's suspect with everybody who's Protestant,
Yep. Puritan or Presbyterian. I see that now. Yes.
or Episcopalians
Or,
too.
oh, right. Even that one. Yes. Of course.
And but he tries to impose the Anglican services on the Presbyterian Church, and that stirs up the first two bishops' wars that go on that are sort of relatively inconclusive.
Mhm.
And that triggers in 1637 the Scots sign the National Covenant in Scotland, which is where we get the name of the Covenanters
Ah, there it is.
for the Scots. Again, I hope this isn't too confusing. I'm
No,
trying to make
you're actually
it.
clearing things up for me, John. It is confusing and you're helping out. That's why I came to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So in 1639, you have the first Bishops' War breaks out, and it's a conflict between Covenanters in Scotland and Royalists in Scotland.
Ah,
You've got the King of England, Charles the First, is King of Scotland and of England and wannabe of Ireland also. So the Irish wars come into the mix here too and further complicate everything.
mhm.
So the first Bishop's War is kicked off, and that's between the Royalists and the Covenanters are fighting each other in Scotland. 1640, Charles recalls the English Parliament in order to obtain money, so he brings them back to finance his military struggle with Scotland, because no, the Scots are fighting Charles too about this whole process. Parliament agrees to fund Charles, but only on the condition he answers their grievances. He refuses, dissolves Parliament, and that's now known as a short Parliament after only 3 weeks. Uh, in 1641, Charles signs the Treaty of London, formally ending the Bishops' Wars. So I believe there were two of them. They're over in 1641.
Yep.
But in 1641, the Irish Rebellion breaks out in Ulster. And so now you have a very interesting situation where uh, there's a massacre of Protestants by Catholics in Ireland. And to go back in some of the history, I mean, I believe it was Elizabeth who started settling Protestant Scots
Yep.
who became the Ulster Scots in Northern Ireland, which was causing all kinds of problems there. So Irish Rebellion breaks out in 1641. And in 1642, the Covenanters in Scotland sent a Protestant army to Ulster to defend the Protestant plantations there. So now you have the Scots, you've got a rebellion against the English by the Catholics, and you've got the Scots fighting essentially on the same side as the English against the Irish. Um,
Wow.
it's at this time that Charles enters the House of Commons, tries to arrest 5 members he accuses of treason in the English Parliament. Um, It caused an uproar in London. Charles flees the capital in fear of his life. In his absence, Parliament passes a militia bill, which in effect seizes control of London Arsenal and places the trained bands and militias under its authority. So now you've got the kickoff of the first English Civil War. You've got the English fighting each other. You've got the parliamentarians um, uh, who are fighting the king and the royalists in England.
Okay.
And initially, the Scots are supporting the parliamentarians on this case because they're angered by Charles and worried about what Charles is trying to impose upon them in
Good.
terms
So in their eyes, that's a child's move, not an English move in
which
general. Okay.
well it's you've got the parliament suddenly at war with the royalists and the parliamentarians are at war in England. Scots come in on the side of the parliamentarians and
Okay.
because they're opposed to what Charles has been trying to do religiously.
Yes, that's what I meant. Okay, that's a key one there. Yes.
Okay. So, and I'm almost done with the background, but 1646, Charles surrenders to the Scots Covenanters, and the Scots then turn him over to the English, which lays the groundwork for the end of Charles, ultimately. Um, and we now enter essentially what's considered the Second English Civil War, which runs from about 1648 to 1649, very much shorter, much briefer. The first Civil War had run from 1642 to 1646. So this
Yes.
is the Second English Civil War. Um, and the Covenanters now invades England to restore Charles I, who's been arrested in 1648. Uh, the Parliament, which has now been purged of a lot of sort of the more moderates and has the more extreme wing that is that Cromwell is about to become the head of. They arrest Charles, they put him on trial, and they behead him on January 30th, 1649. So now we're up to a year before the Battle of Dunbar.
Okay.
Now, Charles II, his son, had fled to the continent, and he was proclaimed king by the exiles there, and then went into heavy negotiations with the Covenanters, with the church, with the Presbyterians in Scotland to come on their side, come to Scotland, but they were very distrustful of him
Right.
because of what had happened with the king, and they were very distrustful now of the Parliament because they thought the Parliament, which had done away with the monarchy, was trying to install a parliamentarian system in Scotland too. So there's another element that comes in there of like motivating forces.
Okay.
Charles does this convoluted route from he finally agrees. They come to an agreement. The Scots and Charles II. They take him by boat up a long voyage up to the through the Orkney Islands and down toward Edinburgh finally.
Yep.
And they're haranguing him the whole way because they distrust him completely because of his royalist background and because of his, his Episcopalian background and his Catholic mother, and they're wanting to make sure they're not making a mistake. So yes,
Um,
so he comes, uh, uh, and the Scots subsequently crown him uh, king of, I believe they said at the time, Great Britain, which further pissed off the British because Great Britain didn't exist yet. So, but they were implying that Charles was now, or saying directly that he was king of England and Scotland.
okay.
So now we come up to the period we want to talk about. So I wanted to give that background to sort of see what, the
Sure.
giant thing that's going on.
That's essential. It's essential to understanding it all, John. Truly.
So Cromwell had run off to Ireland to fight the Scots, fight the Irish, I'm sorry.
In
And
49 now we are about.
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
I believe so. And he's busy developing his reputation of being a real bastard over there. I mean, just his troops are out of control and there's some terrible slaughtering going on. But all the machinations with Charles and Charles coming to Scotland, the English are convinced that the Scots are going to launch a war against England to try to restore the monarchy. So Cromwell leaves the battle in Ireland in the hands of, I believe, his son. I'm not positive about that, and comes back to England. They have a discussion and they want to have a preemptive strike on Scotland.